Hi and welcome to the next in my series in getting ready for the Grand Tournament, which I'm going to the Age of Sigmar Grand Tournament Heats 2 in May, which will be my first Age of Sigmar tournament. And at the moment, I haven't even played any 2,000 point games of Age of Sigmar. So all getting very tricky, all very theoretical at the moment. So I had sort of more or less settled on a list. People keep asking me as well, does that mean you've got your list now? Have you got your list? Well, yes, I do. But of course, if in a month's time something changed, then I would change it to the other thing. But I have one that I think I'm reasonably happy taking. The problem is I've got multiple lists, and each particular one is has its pros and cons. There's no such thing, of course, of taking a list that's strong at everything. You can't do that. Otherwise, everyone would do it, wouldn't they? So I hadn't... Remember, the idea now is that effectively what we're going for is Legion of Blood. But I haven't forgot the Maggotkin of Nurgle. They are still my backup. You know, if I get to it and I think to myself, do you know what? I just see too many weaknesses. Especially once I've tried it out, because I'm going to be trying it out, hopefully building up to larger games with it. And if I just look at it and think, it's not quite what I was thinking, then I can always switch to what I think will be a safer option. My problem with the Maggotkin of Nurgle is I want these characters, the Behemoths in it. I want Rotigus, the Great Unclean One, which is actually no issue, and the Glotkin, bit more of an issue. If I was just going to go for 3 sort of characters and then just take 3 units of Plague Bearers, well, that's not uncommon for people who take Nurgle lists. It's very useful. The idea is one thing that was very frightening at the Heats last week, and I've seen these before as well. Idoneth Deepkin, Morsar Guard, heavy armies with just the Fangmora eels that just race forwards and then suddenly unleash a volley of mortal wounds and then back it up with some decent fighting themselves. And of course, Idoneth Deepkin, there's one particular battle round. It'll either be the second or the third, depending on which way around they do the tides. And that will result in them always going first in that combat phase for 2 combat phases, because it'll be the full battle round. Frightening. So the idea of having blocks of stuff that has a 5 up against mortal wounds and is in other regards one of the toughest battle line anyway, very difficult to shift, is a pretty good counter against it. And when they have worn them down, what have those Fangmora eels got waiting behind them? Big, beefy, Great Unclean Ones, and they're no slouches either. So I think it's a safe bet, but it's a boring one. So I wanted to spice it up. I put a Chimera in there, and I really don't want to... If I take the Maggotkin of Nurgle, I really don't want to do without that, even though it's indicated by the brown colour, it's an ally. But there you go. But yeah, so in terms of taking what I've taken, because of the Chimera, because of the Glotkin, which is more expensive than a Great Unclean One, it means 1 big block of Plague Bearers. I can't really do much else. I mean, I could take 2 small units of Plague Bearers, and maybe that would be useful, and maybe it wouldn't, I don't know. In the end, I've gone for Chaos Warriors, who also, bear in mind, get a 5 up against mortal wounds. So, you know, they're reasonable proof against the mortal wound show. And they've got they're a bit better than Plague Bearers in other regards. So, you know, that's okay. And then the Putrid Blight Kings. So it's a list I'd be okay with, but Legion of Blood is where it's at for me. So let's have a look at things I was considering. So to begin with, this was the list I was considering, an actual Grand Host of Nagash with Manfred, a Vampire Lord leading it. That way you can still get a command trait. And, 2 big blocks of skeletons, very much thinking, get onto an objective and hold it. The problem is, the reason I've moved away from this is come to a bit of a realisation. The Skeleton Warriors, though big, are easily mown down. There's a lot of things that can just mow even a unit of 40 things down. And although you can top them back up to a certain extent, that they won't last that long. Secondly, when it comes to getting an objective, you've got 2 choices there. You either get to it first and hold it with something very tough, which Skeleton Warriors are not. Or you get to it later and push whatever is on it off. Again, Skeleton Warriors with spears can have a hell of a lot of attacks. They can be actually quite useful if they get a charge in. But at the same time, they're not really the sort of thing you would think is going to push something off an objective. It can push some things off, but not a concerted defensive position. So I've moved away from those completely. The other ideas I was considering was like a Neferata, Legion of Blood. This is the first thought I had of it. Just basically cavalry, 2 blocks of Blood Knights. The thing with Legion of Blood is you get... it's got 2 useful allegiance abilities with it. One is the enemy units within 6 inches are at -1 bravery, which, you know, when you mostly need... bravery is useful for a few things, but mostly what it's useful for is battle shock test. And of course, if your opponent's going to take a battle shock test, if it's going to be caused by this army, it's caused by combat. So of course they're going to be within 6 inches. So it's very nice to have -1 bravery. It means if anything's going to run away, it'll be 1 more runs away. Brilliant. 2, and the other one is really good, which means Blood Knights and Vampire Lords get an extra attack on all their melee weapons. So 2 units of Blood Knights, a Vampire Lord and a Zombie Dragon, and a Vampire Lord as well. Superb. Absolutely superb. So this was very much the thinking there. You get a lot of extra benefit from that. Big old block of Grimghast Reapers to essentially sit on something, get them to an objective. They could do a decent job of taking something off it. And they're very defensible as well. 4 up, unmodifiable save. As long as there's and I would intend the Vampire Lord to be with them, then they get a 6 up save against, failing those saves, or a mortal wound. And of course, summonable, so you can keep bringing them back. And I look at this list even now, and I think to myself, yeah, even when I'm comparing it to the one I'm going to come on to, I look at it and think, yeah, this is good. Why aren't I taking this? But the way I've thought about it in the end is, especially watching some of those games, when it's all about the objectives. In fact, I played a game on Friday with just a 1,000-point game with Flesh Eater Court and won by actually acting against my nature. I had a very mobile unit, and it was gift from the heavens, which means the objectives, you don't even know where they are when you're deploying. So having it's highly mobile, a Blisterkin Flesh Eater Court army. My army was highly mobile, and I won relatively easily, even though my opponent, when he got into combat with me, was having the better of it, certainly his main units. But I just stuck to those objectives. I defended those objectives. Even turning down opportunities to charge into my opponent. Even, what was even worse for me, turning down opportunities to charge into a combat that I would almost certainly have won. But I went to the objectives. And that's what it's all about. But the way you get the objectives is either you get to them first, and defend that position, which is fine. The problem is, in order to do that, it's first of all, you need fast units. Okay, well, these are fast units. But second of all, you also need the certainty of going first. If I had the certainty of going first, I can actually put summonable units in reserve and have them pop up at the end of my first movement phase. I can do that, no problem, by putting the grave sites in suitable places. But if I don't get to go first, then I need to knock them off it. And if I've planned to do that. So how do you get to go first? The only way of doing it is with battalions. You've basically got to have as much of your army as possible in a battalion, because units in a battalion you can deploy as a single deployment choice. That's pretty good. So it means some players can have as few as 2 or 3 deployment choices. That's not the case here. I was actually seriously considering, by the way, there is actually a reasonable battalion to be had based around Neferata. It would involve Neferata, 2 Vampire Lords, so I'd go for a Vampire Lord and a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, plus a Bloodseeker Palanquin. So that would be it wouldn't leave very much for other units, but nonetheless, that would be a pretty good death squad to have. And it's a battalion choice, so those 4 choices would be 1 deployment. And the benefit of them, if they stick close to the Bloodseeker, they get plus 4 inches of movement. So, that's quite handy. But I moved away from that in the end in favour of. So here we go. This is what I'm looking at the moment. I'm accepting that I'm not going to get to go first. In fact, I think it's a bit careless to base a strategy around going first, in my case anyway, because I'm just going to, if you just come across someone with just fewer choices, even if you think you've got it down to quite a few, you're still in trouble. So better to base it on the idea of, my opponent's going to grab them first. I will knock them off it. And it gives you a bit more flexibility as well. So let's go through the list first, and I'll show you some scenarios. So for battle line, a unit of just 10 Chain Rasp Horde, 5 Direwolves and 5 more Direwolves. And then as an extra unit, just 10 again, Grimghast Reapers, and then 5 Blood Knights. Now, part of me is a little concerned about this, because I'm just thinking, wow, 10 Grimghast Reapers, 10 Chain Rasp Horde. It'd be so much better if there were 20. They'd last longer. They'd be more likely for me to be able to top them up and all the rest of it. But my strategy is going to be based on the fact that they're just going to occupy objectives. They're not going to be the ones that should be engaging. Obviously, if I'm going to lose a fight, they will have to engage. But it'll be my plan that they don't really have to engage. They're just going to maybe just act as a defensive line. And remember, with Legion of Blood, I get the option, if my opponent completely destroys a summonable unit, well, in my next movement phase, as long as I'm sensible with where I place my grave sites, I can spend a command point and just bringing them back. Just plonk them near a grave site. Job done. The only downside is there's actually, in this army, a lot of useful command abilities, and I've got to be a bit economical with them for when I need to do that. And you know, with 4 summonable units, you know, that's, you get them killed, fine. The Direwolves can just rush ahead, get themselves killed, I'll just bring them back. I'm not saying I'll just glibly bring them back like that, but I've got the option to do it if I think it's going to be useful. And plonk them anywhere I like within range of that grave site, as long as it's more than 9 inches away. So just have a grave site that's, you know, I suppose either side of objectives. And then the big beefy ones, which would be the Blood Knights, as I say, but Neferata, Manfred, because I was always on and on. It's like, I sort of want a Legion of Blood army, but I really want Manfred. Why not have both? So Neferata would have to be the general. So unfortunately, with taking Legion of Blood, I don't get I don't get to have a command trait, which is annoying. And then the other thing, and I discussed this before, the Legion of Blood artifacts, the Relics of Power, are very niche as well. So quite a lot of battles I may not get any use out of them at all, but hey-ho. And then Prince Vordrai, who is the named Vampire Lord. Now, what's really annoying is, he's clearly a Vampire Lord. He's like a special Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, but he doesn't have the Vampire Lord keyword. So unfortunately, even though it's Legion of Blood, the only unit that gets the benefit of that are the Blood Knights. That's annoying. It could be slightly different, actually, but generally speaking, that is very annoying. So, but it's still worthwhile, I think, to do this. Then I thought, because in many ways, I wouldn't mind having a Vampire Lord and somebody joining a post for Prince Vordrai, but then it's a case of, what do you do with the extra 40 points? I think it may actually be 50, because I think this may come to 1990. And my answer was not a lot. The problem is, every time I tried to come up with an army, I was always 10 points short of being able to do something a bit better. With several variants of this army, they've cunningly designed the point system so that no matter what I want to do, I'm always 10 points short. Thanks a lot. But anyway, so looking at a few scenarios. So if it was Border War, the Chain Rasp Horde would be the default choice just to stay back. Now, obviously, if I think that my opponent is sort of one who may be able to put pressure on them, obviously Chain Rasp Horde is not going to stand up for that long against anything. So then I could also hold back the Grimghast Reapers potentially as well. But essentially what I would want to do is I'd accept that my opponent's probably going to get there first. In fact, I might almost be worried if my opponent makes me go first. But as long as I deploy Direwolves directly opposite to objectives, hopefully they won't. And if they do, well, I'll just run to the objectives. That's fine. Then I do get to try and defend them because my characters are quite fast as well. Necromancer there who like accompany the Grimghast Reapers wherever they go, he would go. And the Direwolves essentially just sacrificial. They'll either hang back if I'm the one who has to push forward and countercharge something, or, you know, just be the ones to run forward. Go up the, I mean, you imagine with the Fangmore Eel thing where, you know, they want to rush in and do a load of mortal wounds. It's like, well, you can do it to my direwolves if you like. The important thing would be to get charged and potentially hold them up for whichever turn means that they're always going to go first. Oh, I do worry about Adeneth, I have to say. And this army does nothing to appease that. The other thing in this army is I actually got 6 spells. I mean, I do like to be magic heavy. And this is magic heavy, 6 spells. And you know, there's some pretty good ones on offer as well. For example, you know, I can cast spells to frustrate my opponent by making them -1 to hit. I can cast other ones that will do mortal wounds and heal a nearby death unit. So they can be used for Neferat and Manfred. Because my fear with those two is if my opponent gets a double turn, they are actually really vulnerable. They don't get a save against mortal... Well, Manfred gets a small save against mortal wounds in that the first wound or mortal wound that he'd suffer per turn, he can ignore. So that, you know, is worth a bit. But Neferata, not so much at all. They are, and they've only got 11 wounds each. I mean, Prince Vordry, as would a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, has the Chalice. So in a hero phase, you can just randomly heal D6 wounds. For these guys to heal wounds, they have to slay models. Which means if I have to get them up against another Behemoth and take it down more slowly, then don't get that. So having spells that allow me to do that, or at least a spell that allows me to do that, is at least useful, potentially useful there. And what's a really great feature of the spells, not the spells that these guys come with, but spells that I choose from the Laws of the Dead within the Battle Tome, is there's a really cunning thing. If you get a casting roll, a natural casting roll of 9+, then you get to apply the effects twice. So Vile Transference, for example, I have to pick an enemy unit within 12 inches and then a friendly death unit within 6 inches, which could be themselves. So then the enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. But actually, if I get a casting value of like 10 or more, something like that can be D6. But anyway, let's say D3. Let's say I got a casting roll of 9. D3 mortal wounds, however many wounds I end up doing to it, I can heal that many. And then, oh look, I got a casting value of 9. I'll just do it again. You know, so that's really nice. And imagine if it was the D6. Actually, is there a double for D6 wounds? There is another spell which also does D6 mortal wounds. That's a different spell, Amaranthine Orb. I mean, that'd be nice doing that twice as well. But yeah, that's the thing. They've got spells, and with me being able to cast 6 as well. You know, it's not 6 chances at being able to apply the effects twice, because of course Neferat and Manfred will only have one spell like all the others from the Laws of the Dead. But yeah, so I like it. It does worry me about the fact that if, as I saw in that first game in the Heats last week, someone were to completely knock out one of my big characters, like really quickly, and I'd got nothing in return for it, that would be of concern. That would be of concern. But they're very mobile, they're very fast, very mobile, so they do to a certain extent get to choose their targets. All 3 of them could gang up on one side of my opponent's army, or they could gang up on something particularly nasty. Or they could just go slightly their separate ways. I could have Prince Vordry go with the Blood Knights, be very thematic, and Neferata and Manfred, the 2 Mortarks, going together. Or maybe the 2 Mortarks split up because they're Mortarks and they're both egotistical, you know, narcissists. And Prince Vordry goes with one of them and the other one goes with the Blood Knights, who knows. But, you know, that sort of thing. So you can either split it up into 2 powerful things that have got a good chance of getting a charge in and doing some serious damage, or you could just gang them up or down one side and roll it down. You know, allow your opponent to capture a couple of objectives early on, tie them up with getting direwolves in the way, things like that, and just move your way along. So you've got lots of options with this one. Even though if you get it wrong, you can come a cropper. Now the next one, this could represent 2 different battle plans. The Take and Hold. If it was the Take and Hold, it's one where you effectively have to destroy your opponent. You basically have to do that. Certainly you have to kick them off their objective, but to do that, you're going to have to knock them off. It's always the problem with this one. One player will have to take the initiative and go to the other. And if you're that player, and it's very likely I will be that player because I have 0 shooting at range, then that means me having to go forward, but you daren't leave your other one unoccupied. So I think I would have to leave the Nighthaunt and the 2 Nighthaunt units and the Necromancer behind. and go forward with everything else. But if I thought to myself, I looked at my opponent and thought, well, they don't really have anything to either teleport or sneak round the back, I might just leave the Chain Rasp Horde there and move forward with the Grimghast Reapers and the Necromancer. We'll just have to see how it goes. Because I don't really want to hold back one of the characters just to reinforce, unless it was a serious threat, because then that's taking them out of actually doing the damage down there, where I'll already be light anyway. And then this could also be something like Gift from the Heavens, where the objectives don't appear until you've already deployed, in like second turn, potentially even second or third turn. In that case, of course, hold back probably one of the Direwolf units so they can nip, or even if I don't feel I need them, hold them both back, and so that I can have small units, maybe Grimghast Reapers in 1/3, Chain Rasp in another, and a unit of Direwolves another, and I could still then have one unit of Direwolves go ahead of the Blood Knights to try and take the sting out of any charges, so the Blood Knights can then countercharge. Maybe that would be still useful there. And then finally, the 3 places of power, and this is why, for me, was the big appeal of having 3 very powerful characters, because I'd need to occupy one with just the bog stand. The Necromancer's not going to do a lot anyway. They may as well at least stand an objective. That will obviously not want to be the centre one because it'll get the most attention. It needs to be one on the edge. So secure it there with the cheaper units. Have my powerful characters in range to support you, because if my opponent decides, oh, that's the weak one, I'll go for that. It's like, no, you won't. But other than that, have those around the middle and try and make the fight be around the middle, because obviously one of those characters is going to have to stay very close to that objective. And it's not like, maybe that would have to be one of the Mortarchs who will just be casting their spells. They may not be able to do a lot else from there. While the Blood Knights, Prince Vordry, and perhaps the other Mortarch are the ones who... in a case like this, 3 places of power, what you ultimately need to do is knock out enemy characters. So that would have to be the focus there. And again, so just do that, even if it means losses myself. Once you've got to a position, if you can hold 2 objectives, but this is where going first, your opponent surely would go first, because they would want to capture as many as possible. And you would probably have to focus on knocking out 1 at a time, rather than trying to do 2 at once, unless you thought you were well within it. But rather than risk it, I think knock 1 out on the edge, then move across, leave behind the Necromancer and whatever is needed, and then knock out the middle one. And you've got a couple of turns to do that, but no more than that, because with this one, it's not a case of getting victory points based on the number of the battle round. With this one, it's by how many turns you had held it, in which case you don't want to be messing about there. And then leave someone behind on that and see if you can knock out the 3rd one. Because by that time you should be able to, because if you've knocked out 2 already, you've destroyed a fair amount of your opponent's forces. And in fact, to be honest with you, in a scenario like this, I wouldn't be at all opposed to my opponent grabbing them quickly. Because the thing, all about getting charges in. Get charges in. My Blood Knights, for example, get a bonus on the charge. My Prince Vordry gets a bonus on the charge. So yeah, do that. So that's the plan. That's the army that I'm looking at the moment. I'll just go back to looking at this. I've already started work on Neferata. That's her mount. I've cocked it up. It's actually possible. The good thing is that most of the mount, in fact, what you can see here would be exactly the same for Manfred. So I'll be doing Manfred potentially next week. And I'll have learnt a lot from doing this, because I made a number of mistakes. One of which is that I missed out a piece of the vertebrae. I couldn't get... There was a bit on the bottom, and I was thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't working. And I'm looking at photos. No, it's not like that. What's happening? And I did it the right way round. All the vertebrae are in the right alignment. Missed out a section of spine completely. These 2 bits here, which are not supposed to be together, fit very well together. They fit perfectly together, in fact. So lessons were learned. Should we put it that way? Lessons were learned. Learned the hard way as well. But the other thing is, I saw some advice on putting it together when I was trying to struggle this through, and they said, you know, and in fact the instructions say to glue down the tail bit before the rest of it's really assembled. So I did, and I glued it down as it looked, but unfortunately it hangs over the base quite a bit. So that was annoying, and it's all melted down now. I don't really want to try and break it off in case I actually break it. So it's possible, because not just because of any one of those things, but because of multiple things I've done now, that I will have to just, before the tournament, not immediately, it's all right for playing little games at the club with, but potentially get another one. Get another one. Whatever. The other thing, yeah, so part of bodging it up is I've had to, if you can see there's some green stuff at, no, you can't see green on green. Oh, you can see it sort of. I've got a green screen. Of course you're not going to be able to see green stuff. But yeah, I've had to bodge that up to make it all work. Whatever. But hopefully that'll be finished tonight. Well, in my standard of finished anyway. It's quite funny actually, because all the... I mean, I'd like to think I will be competitive eventually. I'll be just aiming to qualify, and even that might be a bridge too far for this one. But it was quite funny when I was listening to the heats and one of the competitors. So isn't it nice? You know, what you find is these competitive players, you would think that the standard they're painting wouldn't be very good, but actually you find that it's pretty good as well. Well, if I ever become competitive on the tournament scene, no, you won't be able to say that about mine. But it's all right. I mean, you can, you know, if you hold it from a distance, looking at it from a distance, it looks all right, doesn't it? You can't see anything. Oh, no, let's show the other side. You can't see anything too badly wrong with that, can you? It's all right. I'm all right with it. I'm happy. So I'm going to get back and carry on painting that now. So that's the army. I will update later on when I've had a couple of games with it. I should be having at least a 1,000 point game with Neferata tomorrow, but obviously I wanted to build that up as much as possibly, as quickly as possible, for which I need to obviously get stuff painted. Games Workshop haven't helped me out though. I've been doing the dire wolves today, and of course, what bases do they come with? So I've emailed them saying, send me proper bases, please. So we'll see what comes of that. But if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.